each other, Ken. I ever break a promise to you? I will put you in the driver's seat at Le Mans. You just shut your mouth and let me do my thing. All right. Come here.
Morning, Shelby.
Morning, Molly.
I'm yours.
I'll go to hell.
And that's it, folks. Ferrari wins the 24 Hours of Le Mans for the 5th consecutive year.
Mr. Ford, Ferrari has a message for you, sir.
What did he say?
He said Ford makes ugly little cars in ugly factories. And, he called you fat, sir.
We're gonna bury Ferrari at Le Mans. So the great Carroll Shelby is gonna build a car to beat Ferrari with a Ford.
Correct.
And how long did you tell them you needed? 200 or 300 years?
90 days.
Ford hates guys like us because we're different.
We heard he's difficult.
Ken? No, Ken's a puppy dog.
It's awful. There's a problem. The computer will find it.
Get some scotch tape and a ball of wool.
What are they doing?
Making your car faster.
That's more like it! Ken Miles is not a Ford man.
We're on the verge of something. And now you tell me that I can't have the best man in the world behind the wheel?
Give me one reason why I don't fire everyone starting with you.
Well, sir, we're lighter, we're faster. When that don't work, we're nastier.
Go ahead, Carol. Go to war. You got a plan? It's high risk.
I thought the whole point was to win the damned race.
If this were a beauty pageant, we just lost.
Looks aren't everything.
You are listening to Joygasm, a video game and movie podcast. I'm Russ, Xbox Live Toaster 360. He is Steve, Xbox Live Stevavitch. And we've got Car Fever in episode 148 today, November 22nd, 2019. We are going to just jump right into our movie review of Ford v Ferrari, which I know Steve is just chomping at the bit to be able to get into and talk about everything else. And so I say we do what we always do. We'll start off with spoiler-free, high-level impressions of the film, and then we will go right into our spoiler territory. So we'll give you a fair warning ahead of time, but I'm going to go ahead and just rip-roar it into you, Steve. What did you think of this film from a spoiler-free, high-level impression?
It was everything I wanted it to be.
Oh my goodness, you heard it right here, ladies and gentlemen.
I loved it.
Oh, did you now?
When I saw the movie was being made and coming out, I think this time last year, Russ, or around this time, maybe it was December. Anyway, I thought, yes, this is going to be awesome. It's either, well, it was either going to be an infomercial or it was going to be friggin' sweet.
Yeah.
And then when the trailer came out, I said, it's bordering the line of friggin' sweet, but you never know until you watch it.
Yeah.
And then you watch it and it's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was scripted well. I loved the music. I thought it was paced great. I found a couple things that I would probably have done better. Probably like one thing I would have done better, but that won't change my rating of the film, Russ.
Well, not one iota,
Not
Steve?
one Lee Iacocca.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
So I had a blasty blast, and I'm trying to make arrangements to go see it again because I've yet to see it in IMAX, and I'm dying to go back.
Well, and hopefully it will remain in IMAX for a while, just because I know there are a lot of other films that are kind of coming out for the winter season. And so we'll have to keep a sharp eye out there. I know the IMAX theater that's close by to where we live, it had it up there. We'll have to look again after the recording and see if it's still playing in IMAX. maybe if it's not playing all the time, maybe there are certain time frames where they're swapping movies out and stuff. So we'll have to see, because I too would love to be able to see that on IMAX.
What'd you think of the movie?
I thought it was a whole heap of fun. I thought it was a really well done film. I think when it comes to these types of films, first of all, I have a fascination with the 50s and 60s. I think that during the immediate post World War II era, there was just this euphoria that was taking America by storm, and I think there were a lot of folks who were pushing boundaries in various ways that was very creative and in terms of engineering and design. And I think that the car industry in particular was super fun, and just when I think of some of my favorite cars ever, they came from that time period of like the 50s and the 60s. And so it was really fun, not to mention the fact that my favorite car manufacturer that is not in America is Ferrari. Ferrari is my favorite. And it was fun to be able to see some of the background story and whatnot, just because I'm not as much of a diehard car enthusiast like you are. I tend to go to you for more of the information on things, but I find myself really appreciating how a car is made and how a car handles and that sort of thing. And so it was a lot of fun. Of course, I'm a big fan of Christian Bale, and I thought Matt Damon did a nice job as well. We'll get into that later, but overall, highly recommend everybody checking it out. I think that this is one of the most enjoyable original films of the year. And hey, for those of you that perhaps are feeling a little comic book movie fatigue, I think this is a wonderful antidote to that.
Absolutely.
I think that this is just a great film that I think anybody would truly enjoy watching. So without further ado, though, I think we could just kind of step into the spoiler territory. So if you haven't seen the film, you may want to pause us, or if you don't care, then we'll just keep listening. And let's just go into the plot overall. Let's kick it back to you, Steve.
So basically, if you haven't heard of Carroll Shelby, you definitely will now. And if you don't know the story, I mean, there's not really a, well, I guess there would be a spoiler. But so what basically is going on is 24 Hours of Le Mans is like the oldest, longest race in history. And you race this track for 24 hours straight. You swap out drivers and you keep on putting gas in the car and swap out, I guess, parts as they wear out. Hopefully they don't, but it's a long endurance. I mean, you're going the same track from sun up to sundown, and you got to keep with it. Ferrari only wanted to race. Enzo only wanted to race, never wanted to make production cars.
Was that his name?
Enzo Ferrari.
Okay, that's his first name.
Enzo. Okay. Yes. Which that's why they made that one production car, I think around 2000, 2003. The Ferrari Enzo. That's why they called it the Enzo. Anyhow, he only wanted to race, didn't want to get into production. But the rules of Le Mans were, okay, well, you have to race a car that the everyday man can drive. Mm-hmm. And so that's why he started making the Ferrari production line. But he always was focused on racing. No one could beat Ferrari. Ford wanted in on it and didn't know what to do. They were just kind of a everyday sedan for the everyday person kind of company. And they wanted to branch out a little bit, but didn't know how, and brought in Carroll Shelby and his expertise and his little team to design a car, make an engine, test it out, and put Ferrari 6 feet under as long as they could.
Right. Well, I think that, and I'm not even sure how much of this movie is completely true versus things that are made up. I assume that they probably did their background research on these very famous people. And I'm sure also that just because of the different antics that went on, that it probably wasn't too hard to find out quite a few different things that transpired. But I, for one, really enjoyed the pacing of the film. Some people were talking about how perhaps like the first quarter or first half of the film was slower than the second half. But for me personally, I think I found myself really enjoying that. I liked the slow pace that started out where you're just being introduced to this time period. And I liked how you really got the feeling of just what everyday life was like back then, which, I mean, it's considerably different than today's world. Of course. And it was cool because I just felt like I was adequately brought back in time to that, and just seeing just how people were treated and how they dressed and how the neighborhoods looked and that sort of thing. And then, of course, going into this, what I find to be very fascinating about the film was the idea about how some of these car manufacturers were family based. Like you have, Ferrari was indeed, it was started by the Ferrari family. Ford was the same way with Henry Ford. And I'm sure there are other car manufacturers. I mean, when you think of like Toyota, for instance, I'm sure Toyota stems from a family. Lamborghini is another one that came from
Pagani.
And so
and Shelby.
And there you go. And so I think it's really cool because in the film, they really took their time in, I want to say, like, just exploring the family pride, I guess is a good way of putting it, where clearly these different companies have produced a product that is beloved by all kinds of people, millions and millions of people, if not billions of people. And it's interesting to see what comes along with that. Obviously, you have humongous egos. You have people who are very biased towards certain ideologies or whatnot. But also, too, I found myself silently applauding some of the stances that were taken, such as, like, for instance, when Ford had approached Ferrari to acquire them because they were bankrupt, and how there was that one question that the owner asked, and when it was responded with a no, you can't do that on your own. What was crazy was that in the story, of course, it showed how Ferrari was kind of using Ford to actually get a better price from a different company. But what struck me was the level of emotional anger in his response to the VP of marketing, or whatever the guy's title was. And the reason I say that is that normally, like, if you're trying to manipulate a situation for your monetary gain, normally you just be like, well, I'm just not going to be interested in that offer. Thank you, but no thank you. But he got really pointedly mad at the response of him just saying no. And I don't think that was necessarily just pure posturing on his behalf. I think because he's Italian, because he knows that he has a fantastic company, and just being in this type of scenario that he's in, I think that family pride kind of all of a sudden came up and it just bubbled to the surface, and he just wanted absolutely nothing to do with the Ford company whatsoever. So I thought that was really cool to be able to see that. But that wasn't the only scene in the film that kind of explored that. I mean, we saw that quite a bit with Henry Ford II, where he oftentimes really just had a bit of a pompousness to him.
Of course.
And someone who tried to play the role of a hardliner, and it really almost had kind of a byproduct of being spoiled. Like, he was born into this
empire,
huge empire. And so it was cool again to be able to see how you had these power players that, obviously they had a lot at stake in terms of their family dynasty and their empires, like you said, and they wanted to show each other up. So from that part of it, I was very much fascinated with what was going on. And I didn't really know the story. Did you already know everything about this prior to seeing the film?
Not everything, no. It's funny because when I started to think about Carroll Shelby, I want to do all my research, and the guy is a legend. I mean, when I start to research, I want to eat it up, and then I have to continue my life at some point, and so then I stop. But there's a lot that I don't know.
I actually have a random question for you. In the film, when at the beginning, when we see Carroll Shelby racing, he was at Le Mans, right?
Correct.
And who was he representing, though? Like, which car company?
Aston Martin.
Oh,
yeah, that's how he knew that he knew a lot of contacts in Britain and was racing for Aston Martin. And the reason why Lee Iacocca came to see Shelby was because he was the only American racer who had raced 24-hour Le Mans and would know anything about it.
And he and Shelby actually won Le Mans.
I don't recall if he won. I think he
Okay.
did. I think he did win, but I might be mistaken. But he was an excellent racer, and Ferrari actually offered Shelby to drive for them. But Shelby turned them down because Enzo would kind of pit his drivers against each other, kind of like a
competition.
Kind of a competition, like, who's better, kind of who would evolve the fastest sort of thing. And Shelby wasn't about that, so he actually turned Ferrari down.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And then the second question I had, I realize I'm totally like messing up your initial train of thought here, but one of the racers that we found out about later on that was racing alongside Miles, and I think the person who technically won Le Mans at the end, what was his name? I had it and I lost it. McLaren, right?
Right. I forgot if he won, but yes, he was.
He was one of the final.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So was that the same McLaren that actually made the car McLaren, or is that just a coincidence in terms of the name?
I am not sure. I've
got some good questions over here for you.
I was wondering about that, and I meant to look it up, and life happened. So
we'll have to check that out, because that was another thing too. Like Keto, I'm like, I wonder if that was the case, because it seemed to me that you have a lot of these names that in today's world, I mean, it's synonymous with performance and engineering feats of expertise and just works of art. And so, when they were younger, maybe they start out as just race car drivers.
I would not doubt it, because it would be too much irony if Shelby knew a bunch of motorheads from England, and one of them happened to be McLaren, and McLaren was a race car driver, and McLaren was also involved in Formula One as well as 24 Hours in Le Mans. And then they started a sports car company, and they also race today.
Yeah.
Like, it'd be too, I wouldn't push it. I wouldn't put it past them.
Yeah. Another aspect to the plot that I really found myself appreciating was the exploration between mindsets of these different groups. And so like and there's two main groups that I was focusing on. One was, of course, the owners that we just talked about. They have their own social circles where they have their yes men and they have their lieutenants, so to speak. And they are more concerned with continuing that level of just supremacy, right? Like they want to have the kudos, the pomp and circumstance. They want to be able to puff out their chest and say, yes, my car company is the best in the world, kind of thing. And then the second group are the folks who actually are the race car drivers, who are the managers and the grease monkeys and the people who actually they have a pure passion for all things automobile, where like they know how to put together and take apart a car. They're constantly making alterations and changes to make it the best and fastest, handling everything you can think of with the car. And so I really liked just the contrast between these two groups, because they were still linked together, of course, but it was interesting how the philosophies were completely different. How, like, for instance, Henry Ford II, he was pontificating all the time about what he was expecting and how Ford's the best and how we've gone to war and how like we're going to beat Ferrari and all this kind of stuff. But really, like when it came down to like the Le Mans, for instance, he didn't even stay for the entire 24 hours.
Right.
He got in his little fancy schmancy helicopter and takes off and has a nice dinner and goes to bed and then comes back. And meanwhile, the pit crew and the race car driver are just going for 24 hours straight. And they're the ones who are really the deciding factor of whether or not these upper echelon groups are able to either smile for the camera and have all the wine and roses versus the losers. And so I thought that from my standpoint, I was like, man, it was just insane to see that, because I feel as though you can apply that to any industry. It's not just limited to the automobile industry. And I think that especially when it comes, and I found myself relating to Christian Bale's character and, well, I could just say Ken Miles and Carroll Shelby, not because I know anything about cars, because I don't. I know about the extent of my knowledge has to do with checking the dipstick and seeing how much oil I have, and that's about it. However, in terms of their passion, in terms of their constant desire to want to do better and to make it the best it can be, I could relate to that. And there are other instances where you have people who, you know, they have that pure drive.
Right.
There's a pureness to it where that's all they care about. They don't care about all the glamour and all the press and people lauding over them. To them, the payoff is when they can actually design a car that handles and does, you know, basically breaking records. It's that, I can't remember how they described it in the movie, but it's like when you hit that moment when you're driving so fast where you are completely in sync with the vehicle, like your body becomes synonymous with all the moving parts. And I think that's where just they have that feeling of transcending into being reminded of why they're doing this in the first place.
Right. Well, I mean, I think you touch on a lot of aspects. I mean, switching out drivers from, you know, or I should say, if the drivers from America or Italy or Germany or Austria, you know, it doesn't matter. I think all industry recognizes where passion lies.
Yes.
And you can have votes in a committee all day long about what you think would be popular, but when it comes down to finite, just real on needle nose points like racing, how's the car going to handle? How is it going to feel? You know, this is not for sale. This is just for PR, basically. It's just for sport. What's the best we can do? That a committee can't vote on. That you need somebody who's an expert who's going to be living and breathing this all day long. And no matter if you work on a Apple computer or a Microsoft computer or a Sony computer, if someone says, hey, you have a passion for digital design, you're going to say, okay, well, I need a work machine. And they'll say, okay, this is the best we got. You'll say, okay, I can use this. Mm-hmm. So with the race car, a lot of these gearheads, they will, they're really in tune with the car because it's not about the music. It's about, okay, you know, can I feel the feedback in the steering wheel when I go through this turn? Or at this RPM, when does the wheel start to break loose? And all that stuff starts to come down to it because when you're pushing the car as hard as you can and trying not to get in a wreck, it's controlled chaos. And you need to be able to trust the car that it's going to do exactly what you tell it to do because that car is either going to kill you or it's going to save your life. And that's exactly what Shelby did in the movie is he liked the MG body of this British car, but it wasn't fast enough. He wanted it to be a muscle car, but loved the design. And that's where the Cobra basically came for, is the idea came from this MG car, which I think that's where I don't know this for sure, but I think that's probably where he met Ken Miles, because Ken Miles was a mechanic for MG.
Oh, okay.
And that's where the whole thing started. Also with the GT40, the GT40 was from Lola Motors, which was also a British car company. Ford had the idea of it looking more like a, kind of shark finny and whatnot. And so that's kind of where the design came from. But gearheads are gearheads. And so you take one body from here and you take maybe suspension from there, and then you take a motor from another spot and you put it all together. You try to just make the fastest car you can. But that's where the soul comes in. That's where the passion comes in.
Sure.
And that's what, I mean, if you're going to win a race and you don't need a four-door committee car, you need someone who knows specifically what you're going for. And that doesn't come around very often. That's a very few, one person on the planet's going to know that, or 10 people on the planet are going to know that.
Well, and I appreciated too the fact that Ken Miles wasn't just a race car driver. He was a grease monkey. Like he knew the car inside and out as well. And he was very honest and blunt about what the issues were that he was realizing as he would test drive the car at its various stages. I love that. I loved how he came out and he's like, this is going on. I think we need to do this, this, and that. And he didn't beat around the bush. He didn't sugarcoat it. He was just very honest. Another one of my favorite scenes from the film was when they took the computer that they had set up with the car and they just went back to the basics of, it looked like strings, like little ropes tied on with like tape or something. And like, just for whatever reason, that seemed to really be telling in terms of what they needed to adjust. I'm sure there's probably like a technical name for doing that kind of thing on a car. Like I said, I don't know what that is.
Yeah, I think they do something similar, or they used to do something similar when they put a car in the wind tunnel to see how aerodynamic it is. And I think after that one scene, they were saying, okay, well, it's supposed to be, the whole car is supposed to be 40 inches high to be regulation. But if we can adjust this, that, and the other, we can get more aerodynamics and basically make the car faster. Because power is one thing, but if you have power and no handling, or power and no aerodynamics, you increase the drag.
Yeah.
Or if you have power but the car is very heavy, then it also it drags the down. So and a computer can't tell that. I mean, you can input stuff in the computer, and the computer can tell you you're doing great, but the computer is not necessarily in sync with the car, and the computer's not driving the car.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. One other thing too that you touched upon earlier is the concept of decision by committee. And I think, again, this is a universal thing that so many different industries can relate to, where you have people that are not in the trenches with everyone else. They're so high level that they cannot make the right decisions. They think they're making the right decisions. And especially when you're surrounded by other people who have different types of motives and that sort of thing, the waters can easily get muddied. And I really appreciated how this film explored the way that the pit crew and Carroll Shelby and Ken Miles dealt with that, and how there were times where the whole thing could have completely fallen apart, especially when they were manipulating situations to get Ken Miles out of there. And Carroll Shelby had to really be smart about how he could bring Miles back into the fold. And again, it goes back into that sense of having that passion, having, what is your reason? What is your purpose for being here? Is it just to make money and have the glory, or is it to find that sweet spot of when you're racing? And I think probably another scene that I loved, there was one toward the end where I can't remember who it is, but there was that one guy who was basically the kind of the second in command to Henry Ford II. And he comes down and tries to manipulate stuff, and Shelby had it. He like throws his coffee on the floor and in the pit area, and he's like, "All right, get out of here now, leave, get out of here." Like he just was not having it. And to a certain extent, I've had situations that I found myself thinking like it kind of triggered something in me when I saw that scene, because I've had certain jobs in the past where I have a team and we're working on things, and when we are maxed out and we are doing what we know what needs to be done, and then someone will come in clueless or whatever, and they're just trying to get something done because it helps to benefit them, or maybe they're out of touch or whatever. And you have to step up, especially as the supervisor or team leader or whatever, and act as a shield for the rest of your team, because with you being in the trenches, you understand precisely what the priorities are. And I loved how they exemplified that over and over again. I mean, even the phone, like when they kept being so annoying, calling down to the pit crew area, and finally Shelby's like, "Do not answer that phone. You leave that phone alone." And even another scene that I love too was Shelby strolling out across the field during the Daytona, I think it was, with that chalkboard, and I think it said something like 7,000
RPMs.
Yeah. It was awesome how just there was a certain type of, I don't even know how to really describe it, almost like that driver swagger or something, where like he wasn't fazed by all of the rules and all the, like, well, you can do this, but you can't do that. And I make sure you please Mr. So-and-so, and he acted on his gut. And I think that really will resonate with people who go see this film, and they'll have their own stories that they can relate to as a result.
Absolutely. And I think there's something to be said for that, where someone who operates on their own passion, they'll go down in history as being probably the best in their industry.
Right.
But no one goes down in history to be the best yes man, company man type of person.
Right.
Those people are forgotten. And it's so many great scenes in the movie, and those two scenes that you brought up are some of my favorites too. But it makes perfect sense, because I've been through that too, where I want to look at somebody who's above me and say, you hired me to do this job.
Exactly.
I'm doing this job and I'm doing it very well. Why are you distracting me? This is whatever you're doing is going to.
You hired me because you know I have a specialty in this field.
Correct. And if you negatively impact the situation, it falls on me, not on you. So let me do this for the company so that we can all succeed. And sometimes you get so far in the bureaucracy, they can't see the light. And it's beyond me why the company at that level loses the vision of what the accomplishment is.
Another scene that I thought was so telling was when they got Henry Ford II to actually step into their prototype car, and then Shelby took him for a joyride.
Yeah.
And to see the facade just instantly melt away of him trying to act like he's like this tough boss and he expects all this excellence, and he just starts crying like a little baby. And I think that was just that unto itself was so telling, where it's like, man, this is a visual metaphor of how disconnected you are from the very group that's trying to make your wish become a reality. And yet when you're presented with how they are so close to achieving that, you cannot handle it. You literally cannot handle what it is that you are asking these guys to do, despite all the pressures you're placing on them and all the distrust. And I think that's one of the main reoccurring themes in this film that also people can relate to, is the idea of trust. You need to trust your people. You need to trust that they're going to do the job and they're going to do a good job. And especially when you're hiring people who are just, once again, if they live for the industry that they work in, then they're going to burn the midnight oil. They themselves are not even doing it so much to please you as they are after this relentless pursuit of perfection, no matter what industry that you are in. So what other scenes stood out to you?
I loved all the scenes with Ken Miles and his son. I thought were very touching.
Yes.
Ken Miles knew he was good, but he didn't throw it in anybody's face. I love how Christian Bale acted as Ken
Christian
Miles.
Bale is just awesome. Every role he nails it.
Every time, yeah, this is very true. And when I think about him in Batman, or I think about him in that one cowboy movie I saw recently, I can't remember the name. I'm terrible at names. And then I see him in this. He's a phenomenal actor. But I love the way he was scripted and the way he acted in this movie, and I loved his interaction.
He's like a '60s rebel.
Yeah, but. With the family scenes with him. I mean, when I was growing up as a kid, I never got to really go to the races, but I always loved cars, and I would stare at cars. I could watch the races on TV, and I didn't know who anybody was. I just loved when they would switch the camera from like the blimp to inside the car, and all of a sudden you're in the racer's head and seeing what he's seeing, all that stuff, and watching his interaction with his boy, and like that one scene where. Ken Miles wakes up. He can't sleep. He kind of walks, probably get something to drink or something.
Yeah.
And notices his son's lights on in his room, and walks in there, and his son has drawn the map of the racetrack and was just wanting the details from his dad. He's kind of living through his dad in a way.
Well, he's looking up to his dad like his father's his personal hero. He's at that wonderful age of just being easily impressioned upon, and he wants to learn as much as he can regarding what his dad does. I think that's a very sweet thing about kids.
Well, true, but I mean, as a guy, your cars and going fast is kind of part of our DNA.
Yeah.
So you can appreciate it when you're 8, 9, 10 years old, and you can appreciate it when you're 60, 70, 80 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's never lost in a man's life from part A to part B.
I would even say women on the racetrack too. I mean, that there are women out there that, my goodness, I mean, I would have never have thought that they would have the same level of interest, but they do. Like, you have women out there who, like, whether they're race car drivers or maybe themselves are mechanics, and they can roll with the boys.
Yeah.
It's pretty impressive.
That's awesome. Actually, now that you say that, there was a lady who, back when I was doing the car stereo, we were working on this lady's Porsche, and we were talking cars, and she says, "Hey, do you know why they put the ignition on the left side in the Porsche?" No, and actually, I don't. It's because it's German, and they're different over there. And she says to me, she says,
before the Germans get here.
Yeah, she says it comes from the racing heritage, because if the car ever crashed and caught fire, they'd have to turn the car off, and all they would have to do is stick their hand right in the
that makes sense,
through the window to turn the car off. They wouldn't have to reach past the driver for the right hand side ignition.
Interesting.
I was like, oh, that's hot. That's so
So
cool.
she
You
knew
know
that.
Yeah.
Way
Freaking
to
awesome.
go.
So, anyhow, so back to the scene. Ken Miles doesn't really want to talk about it. He wants to rest, he wants to sleep, but then he really gets into it, starts talking about the details, about the turns that he has to go through and how much he has to let on the gas versus let off the gas, and how he has to look out for the car to behave a certain way. And he's really getting, his son is just eating it up. And I thought, yep, that could be me. That's me right there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's. There were quite a few scenes in there with the father-son relationship that I thought was super cool. And like just the little racetrack thing you talked about that he drew out and wanting to know all different things. Personally, my probably was some of the most memorable moments with the father-son relationship is I just loved how his son cheered for his dad.
Right.
Like at every opportunity that came out, I mean, he was all about it. He just lost his composure and was just all about just being so proud of his dad. And I thought that was pretty cool. The chemistry between Ken Miles and Carroll Shelby, I also thought was very believable in the film. I think that both Matt Damon and Christian Bale did a fine job of just cultivating that chemistry. It seemed very authentic. It didn't seem like it was forced at all. And I personally really like the idea of how the race car driver was from the UK, as opposed to Carroll Shelby, who is not only American, but he was, I believe he's from Texas.
Yeah, Dallas, baby.
Yeah, and so, you have this Texan and this Brit who are together, and it was just super fun to see their relationship. And I, for one, really appreciated how you could tell they've known each other for so long. And how, yeah, there are times when they can disappoint each other. There are times when they can get on each other's nerves. But what trumped all of that was the fact that they could read each other so well. And I think something like that is truly special in the real world, where if you have someone where like you don't have to say one word, but you can tell by the look on their face and pinpoint what it is that's going on. And I don't know, you saw that quite a few times through the movie where one of them was vexed or one of them was conflicted or one of them was sad or one of them was excited about something or whatever it is. And I really enjoyed watching their relationship. I truly did. I thought that I could watch another 2 hours of this, of just them doing their thing. I mean, even after the Le Mans thing was over with and just seeing how they continued to hang out together, I just found myself enjoying seeing that friendship, that brotherhood on the screen.
Yeah. And even at the end, like you mentioned, this kind of goes back to the other point before with the passion is I watched this small documentary with Carroll Shelby and the questioner asked him about money. And his response was, well, money just gives me more means to do what I love to do.
Yeah.
And it wasn't necessarily about the winning for him. It was just about making fast cars,
right,
and racing. And so at the end, when Ford, of course, wins, that's no spoiler. They win the race. Someone else got the glory because they won by an inch, and Carroll and Ken talk about how they can make the car better. And Carroll says, "Well, what are we doing here? Let's go back and let's work on it." I mean, that is to them to a T.
Yeah. And again, even with them walking away, they realized that due to a technicality that one of the other race car drivers got first place. And the romanticized component to this whole thing was that it was Miles' race to lose, that he was a lap ahead of everybody. He broke his own record and he was able to overcome some of his maverick antics and actually just be a part of the team for once. And that was a huge triumph for him personally. You saw his wife be super proud of him for doing that. And you can tell that he was he was bummed that he didn't get it because, he should have gotten it. And
when he's looking in the rearview mirror and he's not seeing anybody on the rise, he's like, all right, guys, catch up. Let's go. Kind of thing. I'm like, oh man.
But for me, I felt bad that he didn't get the glory for that. He didn't actually officially get the first place position. But I thought, my goodness, for him to be able to walk away from that race, knowing in his head, he's like, yeah, I won that race, even though, yeah, it's not on paper or whatever. Like, I decided to slow down. There was no problem with my vehicle or whatever. And I confronted a flaw of mine personally and was able to overcome that. You know, I just really thought of that as being kind of the bigger man moment for himself. And not only that, but like you said, even when the press was running out and the fans were frolicking toward the person who actually won first place and you had all the flowers being distributed, that sort of thing, I loved how both Ken Miles and Carroll Shelby just ended up just walking away from it, not with feelings of being butthurt or anything like that, but really, I mean, like, again, their minds were just set forward. Like, you know, I noticed there are some other issues with the car, and I think that we can iron those out. We need to take it back to the track. Like, they were already thinking ahead of like how they can make the car even better and faster for next time. And my understanding is that they continued as a team and won Le Mans, like, I think, 4 times overall?
It was at least 3 times, if not 4.
Okay. There was several times there within, like, I think from 1967 to 1970, somewhere around there.
It was still in the 60s. It was
okay.
both in the 60s.
And, of course, one of the foreshadowing elements in the plot was how oftentimes cars will not respond. Or maybe the driver will lose control and you will have car crashes. And whether or not the driver is able to get out of the car is kind of up in the air every time. And we saw that over and over again where Carroll Shelby, of course, he was in a race, he lost control, and then the car caught fire and then he had his back on fire and he didn't even realize it. And then there was a time when Miles was testing out the prototype for the Ford GT and the brakes failed and they were trying to figure out what they could do with that. And luckily he was able to walk away from that. And it's interesting how it examines the idea, the notion that when you tempt fate over and over and over again, how eventually, more often than not, it will catch up with you.
Right.
It doesn't matter what that fate is that you're tempting, but in this instance, it was such a classic example of how they were thrill seekers. They were pushing the edge of engineering to just that bleeding edge in terms of how they can get this car to be the best it can be. But unfortunately, you are in this new area that is just, it's filled with fog. There is no roadmap or blueprint to kind of show you the way. And the tragic thing about that is that sometimes that leads to loss of life.
Well, true. Well, at the same time, they didn't have a whole lot of time to design a very safe car. They had enough time to make a fast car.
Yeah.
And so there were some corners that were crossed and, you know, the fuel lines were basically kind of running almost along the lines of the door.
Really?
Yeah. And so if there was a car crash, I mean, yeah, the car most likely would catch fire. But, you know, ever since they had a design, they've improved upon the design, you know, nowadays, so that's rarely ever going to happen. But sometimes other corners have to be cut because you're looking for performance, and part of the performance is the aerodynamics of the car.
Yeah.
So if you make the body a certain way, the rest of the car kind of has to fit in that mold that you designed for aerodynamics. And if the fuel line has to run a certain way, well, then you just hope you don't crash on that side, sort of thing.
You know, I was talking recently with a Joygasm Patreon supporter, Sean, and he's a huge car enthusiast. He absolutely loves various exotic cars. He mentioned to me about how dangerous the Le Mans really was back in the day, about how pretty much it was expected that there would be someone who would probably perish during the course of the race because those cars were so unsafe.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about racing from the beginning, there was no seat belts and you had an open cockpit.
Oh, they had no seat belts.
Yeah. Well, no. In the beginning racing, in the way beginning, they didn't have any seat belts and they were flying around tracks and the tires were real thin, like little bicycle tires sort of thing.
That's right.
And so, and they were dirt tracks. They weren't in pavement. And so, you know, as we continue along, you know, the chronology of racing, then more kind of, I guess, restrictions or safety measures, you know, put in place. I mean, some of these racetracks didn't even have like guardrails on them, for crying out loud. I mean, if you crash, you fly off in a field somewhere and you might not even have paramedics to come help you out. You were dead.
let's switch gears over to cinematography. This was actually another one of the highlights of the film. I really liked how they framed all these different shots. I loved the look that they came up with in post and just the way they shot it. It had a crispy 60s vibe, 50s, 60s vibe, and I also really enjoyed the scenes that they showed of the cars racing from the point of view of the race car driver. In fact, if I had to have some sort of negative critique about the film, it's that they didn't have enough of those shots. There were certain shots where it was like a first person view of the car as it's careening around corners, and it instantly just made me feel like I was driving the car, and I literally could feel just the kinetic energy and the inertia of the vehicle just sitting in the theater. Just sitting in my seat. I'm not moving. I'm just like, whoa, whoa. Like, you just feel it. But I was surprised as to how few of those types of shots were there, because obviously you're going to have major car fans coming in and they want that adrenaline rush. They want to be able to feel, just the sheer sense of power and speed. And I just wish, if they had included maybe another like 5 minutes worth of different POV clips of the car where you could see them, whether they're barreling down a straightaway or they're taking a hairpin turn or whatever. Like, I wanted to see a few more of those shots cut in. I was curious if you felt the same way or not.
I did feel the same way, but it's just a toss up because you have to kind of move the movie along, and if you stay on a shot too long, then it'll start to drag. They kind of have to cut it a little quicker.
Well, that's what I was saying. Cut it throughout. Like, don't have like just 5 minutes of just that, but like,
right.
Have like 5 minutes of B-roll that then you can cut and splice in, here's 2 seconds, here's 5 seconds here, and just that sort of thing.
True, but I also think that maybe they thought of that and they had to get through a certain amount of races, and if they kept on showing like the side view of the shot of this race and then times 5 for however many races they had, I think it would have started to feel like they did it too many times. I don't know, maybe. I was happy with the way it is. I loved it being in my face, because racing is really in your face.
Sure.
And that with the perspectives and the cinematography, and I have to throw in the sound too, because those are...
Let's just go into it. Let's talk about sound, Steve. Go ahead.
Those are the way the cars sounded. Those are not fake.
I know that you are particular about the way vehicles sound, whether
Yes.
they are in games or movies.
So I've mentioned plenty of times where I'm playing Forza, and I don't know what goes into the sound design or the memory restriction that they have to because I know the microphone. Yeah, you can record a great sound. I just don't know why they can't transfer it into a game per se. But that's not my field. I don't know the restrictions. But all I know is that what I'm expecting is for it to sound true. And I've seen enough. I've never heard the Ferrari in life, but I've seen plenty of documentaries on it, and that's the way the car sounds. But the GT40, on the other hand, I have heard it in person, because I was going to work one day back in California, and there was a guy who lived in the county that we grew up in who had one. They had a replica.
Was it like a car kit, or was it like an authentic?
It was an authentic. And he was driving in front of me, and he wasn't goosing it or anything, but he was driving in front of me, and I could smell like the raw gas coming off it and stuff, and it sounded just like it did in the movie.
Yeah.
So you heard it from me. It's factual.
Steve gives it a 2 thumbs up with the sound.
But also, with the racing, you want that loud, almost distorted exhaust motor sound. That's all part of it. If everything sounded like a Volkswagen Beetle, it wouldn't be that exciting.
Yeah.
So, and the XD theater we saw it in too at Cinemark was awesome.
They have
so
exquisite
good.
sound system in there.
They do. Man.
Every movie we watch, I'm just like, man, I'm getting my money's worth just in the sound alone. But this, honestly, it wasn't IMAX, but the theater's screen size, dude, that was big.
Yeah, for your hometown theater, that the XD is definitely worth the money.
I also think it was nice to touch upon the soundtrack itself. I ended up buying the soundtrack right after I saw the movie, because there were several rock and roll songs that I thought were just super fun. I had never heard them before. Clearly, they were made in the 60s. And it was just one of the funny things about those songs is when you're listening to just the soundtrack itself, I forget about how short songs were back in the day. And it made sense because of the way that they were recorded in the studios, because they had like those, I don't know if it was like called 8-track tapes or whatever it was, but essentially everything was recorded on the tape. And so you only had so much space and time to be able to have it there because they didn't have computers back then. But it's just crazy because like every song is like 2 minutes. And like right when the song gets going, I'm like, yeah. And then all of a sudden it starts to fade away. I'm like, wait a minute, it's not done yet. Wait, we got another minute or something here. But did you get the soundtrack?
I have not got it yet, but I want it. But I had the same feeling. I thought, man, thank goodness someone didn't put, Creedence Clearwater back in there on another movie again. Right. They make some great music, but when you start to hear the same song in a ton of different movies, you think, come on, guys, there was a bunch of music in that era that was really good.
Yeah.
Someone has to have a record of it. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Someone's using the same, mixtape on all these movies. So I was really thankful that they chose the songs they did. And yes, I won't be picking it up, Russ.
Yeah, well, very nice indeed, Steve. Was there anything that we are forgetting to talk about?
Well, I will tell you what.
We've been going 100 miles per hour in this conversation.
Have. So one thing that I really wanted to see, and it's not, and again, this is not a criticism, but I would have liked to see more of the concept of the vehicle shown. I mean, what they did was they said, okay, Shelby's flying off. He's taking this job with Ford, and he's going to make a car, and it's going to come back, and Ken Miles is going to drive it. And so that's just what they did. And at one scene he left, and in one scene he was back, and here's the car. And then they made modifications to it, of course. But I wanted to see all the thought process and the design that went into the car. Maybe when the Blu-ray comes out, they'll have an extended version. I really hope they do, because there's a ton of history.
Yeah.
Which brings me to my second. And so again, that's not a criticism, because the movie only had to be so long. And it was a pretty long movie as it is. And they can only show so much. But the other criticism I guess I would have is that it was too short.
The film was too short.
Yeah, I wanted to see a lot more. I could have sat there.
Wasn't the movie like 2.5 hours?
Yeah, it was 2.5 hours.
Oh.
And I wanted more, baby. I mean, Lord of the Rings was 3 hours long, and I loved every minute of it. And this is the same way. I wanted it to be longer. I mean, I didn't want them to tidy it up. I mean, give me everything. When you listen to Carroll Shelby talk on some of these interviews, he'll start to kind of ramble.
Is he still alive?
He's not.
Oh, okay.
He'll start to ramble and get off topic about other stuff, like other gearhead stuff, and it's all good rambling. Like, you don't care what he talks about. He's almost like John Madden in a way. Like, if you could hear John Madden speak, it probably wouldn't matter what he said about sports. Like, you would just love that he was speaking.
Right.
And so if they could transfer more of that into the movie and have the more of his history laid out, I would love it even more.
Well, good. Well, if you have nothing else that you want to cover, I could go into movie trivia courtesy of IMDb.
Sure. Let's do it.
All right, let's go in. Matt Damon said the number one reason he wanted to do the movie was to work with Christian Bale.
Oh, my goodness.
A little bit of brotherly professional love there. During one of the scenes at the Le Mans circuit, Jackie Ickx can be seen standing in the crowd despite his success with Ferrari in Formula One. Ickx is widely known for holding the highest number of wins at the Le Mans 24 hours at the time, with 6 victories, being 1969, 1975, 1976, 1977, 1981, and 1982. His first win was in a Ford GT. Matt Damon and Christian Bale agreed that the brawl between their respective characters was the most fun scene to film. Both have experience of extensively choreographed fight scenes that take weeks to learn. So it was a positive change that they only had to rehearse the brawl for 20 minutes and were not required to look lethal while doing it. And honestly, that was one of the, again, in a list of great scenes, that was just yet another great scene. We didn't really touch upon that too much, but definitely had that brotherly component to the whole thing. In preparation for his role, Christian Bale took race driving lessons at the Bondurant High Performance Driving School. Have you heard of that?
I have not, no.
As it happened, the founder of the school had been a friend of Ken Miles.
Nice.
So in addition to the driving, Bale also got to hear stories of the 1960s racing scene. Bale's instructor and the film's stunt coordinator, Robert Nagel, later stated that he's hands down the best actor I've ever trained. Oh, ain't that nice? According to Matt Damon, Christian Bale had to lose 70 pounds before filming began. Bale had previously gained a lot of weight for his role in Vice and had about 7 months to lose it all and then some to play the lean race car driver. Of course, by the name of Ken Miles. Damon also inquired of Bale how he managed to lose all the weight, to which Bale replied that he simply didn't eat. He just went all anorexic, I guess. Damon said he was impressed by Bale's monk-like discipline. And he really is. I mean, when you think of all the different roles he's done, it's amazing how, like, in The Machinist, I mean, he got so rail thin. And then I think the next film after that was Batman, where he had to bulk up. And he just got, like, super juiced and buff. In order to recreate the Le Mans circuit as it existed in the 1960s, the scenes take place on the racetrack, had to be shot in 5 different locations. This proved a challenge in terms of continuity, as not only the cars had to be correctly placed for each shot, but the weather had to be consistent as well. Visual effects was critical in fixing a variety of continuity errors, some of which were as simple as adjusting clocks at the right time. Let's see here. Christian Bale was originally set to play Enzo Ferrari in Michael Mann's Enzo Ferrari film, but dropped out due to concerns he had regarding getting the proper weight in time for the movie. And director Michael Mann replaced him with Hugh Jackman. I haven't even heard of that film. Have you heard of that?
No.
We'll have to take a look at that.
Hugh Jackman's in it?
I guess he's the one who played Enzo. And I guess the film is just called Enzo. No, Michael Mann. Yeah, the film's called Enzo Ferrari.
What? That's going on the Netflix list right now.
Marketed as Ford v Ferrari in North America, in most other countries around the world, it is titled Le Mans 66. Let's see. What else do we have here? Before the Ford Motors event to introduce the new Mustang, Shelby pilots a Lockheed Model 10 Electra with other Ford executives. Shelby did not go to school and enlist in the United States Army Air Corps, serving in World War II as a flight instructor and test pilot. He graduated with the rank of Staff Sergeant Pilot. Interesting.
It says Enzo Ferrari is in production right now.
So it hasn't come out yet. Okay. I was going to say, I think we would kind of feel bad about
passing that one up.
Yeah. Now, this movie was formerly titled Go Like Hell, and Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt were considered for the roles. Now, that would be interesting, too. Think about that. Imagine seeing Tom Cruise and Brad. I think the last time I saw them in a film together was, what was that one? What was that vampire movie called? Interview with the Vampire.
Yeah.
They were both in that. That would have been pretty cool, too.
Yeah.
I mean, we have seen Tom Cruise play a race car driver in Days of Thunder.
That's true.
But the question is, would you want to see him play as Ken Miles or as Carroll Shelby?
Neither, actually. I couldn't see it. I couldn't see him doing either.
With a lot of the testing runs and GT40 development taking place at LAX International Airport, you can regularly see the iconic theme building, which was inspired by the Jetsons cartoons in the background. It built in 1960 to 1961. This was the most recent terminal building added to the airport at the start of the 60s. Ford distanced themselves from the film before it was released over its portrayal of Leo Beebe and Henry Ford II as villains. No surprise there.
No surprise there. I know what, I had a thought that might happen.
All scenes of the Daytona 24-hour race were filmed at Auto Club Speedway in Fontana, California. I wonder why they didn't just go to Daytona. That's kind of surprising.
Yeah, I don't think they could do it at Daytona.
Why? Because they're not racing every day.
Yeah, I just don't think Daytona would have the proper locale look.
This will be the third time Matt Damon has worked with an actor who has portrayed Batman. He previously worked with Ben Affleck and George Clooney and will be starring with Val Kilmer in Jay and Silent Bob reboot. It's kind of a fun. I couldn't resist that one being a Batman fan. According to his Instagram, Josh Brolin had some scenes or a cameo in the movie, but they were cut out. Oh. This would have been Christian Bale and Matt Damon's second collaboration had the latter accepted the role of Harvey Dent in The Dark Knight. I had no idea about that. Very interesting. I cannot see Matt Damon as Harvey Dent.
No.
I think who they got already was perfect for the role. Got a couple more here. Second time that Matt Damon has played a character named Carol. He previously played one of Tina Fey's love interests in 30 Rock, who was not only named Carol, but who also was a pilot. And finally, while pitching his racing idea in 1963, Lee Iacocca notes that James Bond does not drive a Ford. Bond did drive a Mustang in Thunderball from 1965 and later in Diamonds Are Forever from 1971. And that is your movie trivia courtesy of IMDb. So, Steve, what are your concluding thoughts on Ford v. Ferrari?
Well, I'm going to have to say, like I said in the beginning, it was everything I wanted it to be. I loved every minute of it. My only criticisms were hardly even criticisms at all. My criticisms were just basically me being a fan and wanting to see more. But that just means I can hope for special features on the Blu-ray or 4K version.
Sure.
When it comes out.
You should definitely get the 4K version of that one.
Yeah. I mean, when you see a movie and you don't want it to end, and the casting is good, the sound is good, the music is good, the chair is comfy, and you know, and you're a fanboy of everything that they're showing on screen, and they're doing the story right. My gosh. Oh my goodness. I mean, they could have taken this movie any direction they wanted to take it, but the way they took it is inspirational. It is, to me, it might not be 100% factual, but the way they told the story, a lot of people can relate. Even if you're not a fanboy of racing and or being a gearhead, there was tons of other scenes that showed, like we were talking about, how you have bureaucracy getting in the way of passion. And a lot of folks kind of think can relate to that. So if you can't relate to racing, you can relate to just being the man in your industry and you know, having all these obstacles in the way. I can't wait to see it again.
Well, and I'm just dying to know, Steve, how many stars are you going to give it?
Wholehearted 5-star.
5-star rating right here from Stevavitch. I had a feeling.
I had a hard time even getting to sleep that night. I was thinking about that movie in my bed and how happy I was, and I felt like a little kid, and I felt like an adult, and man, I loved it. I absolutely loved it.
Fantastic. Well, for me, Steve, before I saw this film, I was looking at a few reviews that had come out early, and it kind of psyched me out a little bit because the reviews I did see, they seem to be just kind of okay or good in terms of their concluding thoughts, where they said, well, you know, it's a decent film, but I would have liked this, and that, and the other, and that sort of thing. And I was thinking, oh, I wonder if this film is going to be any good. And I'm here to tell you and all of our listeners that those reviewers need to have their heads examined, because this film is absolutely a blast. It is wonderful to go see. I really from the 1950s and 60s to seeing the chemistry of the acting performances between Matt Damon and Christian Bale, as well as the others. Everybody in the film were perfectly cast. I love the music. The cars themselves, they are so iconic and classic in terms of their designs. Even to this day, I look at them and I want one. I would love to, if not own one, then just have the pleasure of driving it and getting that experience. But I think too, one of the film's greatest strengths is the relatability, and whether it's a father-son relationship or even a husband-wife relationship, or it's an employee-employer relationship, you have a lot of these different types of setups that I think anybody can draw comparisons to and can be reminded of similar situations that they were in. And I think it's a wonderfully accessible movie in that regard too, just because oftentimes people, you go and you see something and you feel like, well, that was a good story, but there's no way I can relate to that. And I feel as though this was one of those films. And I truly appreciated the idea of how different it is, the contrast of folks who are in those upper echelons of management versus the people who have a passion to do what it is that they do. And I think that will forever be a struggle. I don't think that it will ever be contained within a time capsule of, during this time period, there were these types of discrepancies as to how to properly manage your company or whatever it is. I think that it's unfortunately a part of the human condition. I think that there are certain flaws within all of us that have to be overcome. And I think when it comes down to it, I think that it's so vitally important to have a laser focus on what it is that you want out of something. What is your purpose for being here? And I feel like the film did a fantastic job of examining that and coming away with just these two people who were absolute experts and almost, dare I say, Renaissance men for their time as it applies to the car racing industry. And I was with you. I really did not want the film to end. It was fun. I think that was the coolest thing about it, is that especially in this age, and believe me, I'm a comic book movie fan. I love me some comic book movies, but I can also really appreciate seeing a film that has nothing to do with that. And I found it honestly refreshing to watch a true story and one that was an American triumph. Because I'm a big fan of those types of stories as well. But I don't know, like having original filmmaking like this come about, it acts and serves as a reminder of how, yes, there are lots of other types of stories to be told. Not everything has to be told wearing spandex and a cape kind of thing. Not that I'm dogging those types of movies at all, because as everyone knows, I love those movies too. But I think that it would be fantastic to be able to see more of these types of movies come out. And especially when it comes to period pieces, I think that so many times those types of films can be overlooked. But, I was thinking of a film I watched recently that won some Oscars last year, which was The Green Book. And it was absolutely a wonderful movie. That movie also, I believe, took place around the 50s and 60s too. And I mean, it had nothing to do with racing cars or anything like that, but just really, really touching film. And it was also a true story. It was based on real people. And I don't know, I hope that Hollywood continues to look for more films that are in fact like that. I would say for any types of like critiquing here, as I mentioned earlier, I would have liked to have seen a bit more of like the kind of first person POV racing and just having more of that, just being in the moment of tearing through the racetracks and that sort of thing. But that is a very small little nitpick that I have. And otherwise, I believe is just probably one of the best films of the year. And as a result, I would say I would give it... I'm not ashamed to say it. I too will give it 5 stars.
Oh, snap. I was holding my breath a wee bit.
I wanted to make you squirm, Steve. I wanted to see how sweaty you could get in that chair over there.
I was getting a little bit greasy.
Finish line was coming up. I wasn't sure if I was going to win. That wraps up this episode of Joygasm. Make sure you tune in next week. Thanks for hanging out with us. If you enjoyed this episode, we invite you to check out patreon.com/Joygasm. That's spelled Joygasm. And consider becoming a monthly contributor. You'll get exclusive perks and early access to the show. Not to mention, it really helps us continue doing what we love to do. Also, you can follow us on social media and YouTube. Just do a search for Joygasm TV. Last but not least, search Joygasm TV on Twitch to see us stream our gaming adventures live every Wednesday night at 9:30 p.m. Central Time. We will see you next week.
Good night.